Hannah Mercer stood on the front porch of her small cabin, clutching her 6-month-old son James to her chest, as the whispers of the townsfolk floated on the autumn breeze. Colorado Territory, 1875, a place and time that once promised a fresh start had become a prison of judgment and scorn. "There she is," came a harsh whisper from Mrs. Abernathy, the shopkeeper's wife, the widow with her peculiar child. Hannah tightened her grip on James, whose mismatched eyes, one blue as the sky, one green as spring grass, and the birthmark that covered half his face, had made him an object of superstition in the small mining town of Silveridge. In the 3 months since his birth, the townsfolk had gone from offering condolences over her husband's death to avoiding her entirely, crossing the street when they saw her coming, refusing to sell her goods, whispering that her child was marked by the devil. She lifted her chin defiantly. At 22, Hannah had already weathered more storms than most faced in a lifetime, losing her parents to typhoid, marrying young, traveling west with dreams of prosperity, only to have her husband Michael die in a mining accident before he ever laid eyes on their son. She would not let these small-minded people break her, but as she descended the steps to make her weekly attempt at buying supplies, her heart sank. She needed flour, sugar, coffee, basic necessities. With winter approaching and her meager savings dwindling, she couldn't afford to be turned away again. The single street that comprised most of Silveridge was busy that morning. Miners headed to their claims, merchants arranged their wares, and ladies gathered in small clusters, their conversations dying as Hannah approached. She squared her shoulders and headed toward Abernathy's general store, praying that today might be different. A commotion at the edge of town drew everyone's attention. A rider approached, tall in the saddle, his bay stallion kicking up dust. Hannah paused along with the rest of the town to watch the stranger's arrival. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who knew the wild lands. His dark brown Stetson was pulled low over his face, but as he neared, Hannah could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. His duster was trail-worn but of good quality, and the rifle in his saddle holster gleamed with care. Everything about him spoke of a man who lived by his own rules. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop in front of the saloon and dismounted in one fluid motion. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad beneath his duster. When he removed his hat to wipe his brow, Hannah caught sight of dark hair and keen eyes that seemed to take in the entire town at a glance. Those eyes landed on her, and for a moment the world seemed to still. Then Mrs. Abernathy's voice shattered the moment. "Mrs. Mercer, I've told you before. We don't have goods to spare for you and your child." Hannah turned away from the stranger to face the shopkeeper's wife, who had emerged from the store with her arms crossed. "Mrs. Abernathy, please, I have money. I'm not asking for charity, just the opportunity to purchase what I need." "There's a settlement 15 miles east that might serve you," Mrs. Abernathy said coldly. "Perhaps they're more accommodating to your situation." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. 15 miles was impossible with a baby and no horse. "My situation is that I'm a widow trying to care for my son, nothing more." "That child ain't right, and everyone knows it," called out Josiah Wilkes, a miner with a perpetual sneer. "Got the mark of evil on him, bringing bad luck to this whole town." Hannah clutched James tighter as he began to fuss, sensing her distress. "My son is a perfectly normal baby boy, he just looks different." "Different?" scoffed another woman. "My sister's cousin had a baby with a mark like that, died 3 days later and took 2 cows and the family dog with it." The absurdity of the statement might have made Hannah laugh if not for the murmurs of agreement that rippled through the gathering crowd. "The mine collapse started the day after he was born," someone else added. 3 men dead since then. "And the drought. And Thompson's daughter took ill." The accusations piled up, each more ridiculous than the last, but the fear behind them was real and dangerous. Hannah took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone she was among these people. "That's enough," came a deep voice from behind her. The stranger from the saloon had approached without Hannah noticing. Up close, she could see the sun lines around his eyes and the way his hand rested casually near his holstered pistol, not threatening, but making his capability clear. "Ain't none of your business, mister," Wilkes said, though with less conviction. "I'm making it my business." The stranger's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. "I've ridden through a lot of towns and I've seen a lot of foolishness, but I've never seen grown men and women afraid of a baby." "You don't understand," Mrs. Abernathy began. "I understand plenty," the stranger cut her off. "I understand that this lady and her child need supplies, and you're refusing to sell to her because of some superstitious nonsense." He turned to Hannah, his expression softening. "Madam, what do you need from the store?" Hannah was so stunned by his intervention that it took her a moment to find her voice. "Flour, sugar, coffee, some salt pork if they have it, a few other things." The stranger nodded and turned back to Mrs. Abernathy. "I'll be purchasing those items. And I'll be watching to make sure they're the same quality you'd sell to anyone else." Mrs. Abernathy's face reddened, but something in the stranger's steady gaze made her reconsider whatever she'd been about to say. She turned and marched back into her store, the crowd parting for her. The stranger turned to Hannah. "I'm Heath Wilson," he said, tipping his hat. "Hannah Mercer," she replied, still wary but grateful, "and this is James." Heath looked at the baby, taking in his mismatched eyes and the port wine birthmark without a hint of disgust or fear. Instead, he smiled and extended a finger, which James promptly grabbed with his tiny fist. "Strong grip," Heath observed. "He'll make a fine horseman someday." Something in his simple acceptance made Hannah's eyes burn with unshed tears. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her son as simply a child rather than a curse. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson, but I can't accept charity." Her pride was one of the few things she had left. "It's not charity, Mrs. Mercer, it's common decency." He glanced around at the dispersing but still muttering crowd. "And perhaps you could help me in return. I've been riding for days and I could use a proper meal. I'm happy to pay." Hannah hesitated. Inviting a strange man to her home went against everything she'd been taught. But there was something about Heath Wilson that put her at ease, and the thought of cooking for someone who didn't look at her son with fear was too tempting to resist. "I can provide a meal," she agreed, "but I'll need those supplies first." Heath nodded and followed Mrs. Abernathy into the store, leaving Hannah standing outside with James, who had settled against her shoulder, his curious eyes taking in the world that had already judged him so harshly. Inside the store, Heath's firm presence ensured that Hannah received fair treatment, though Mrs. Abernathy's lips remained pinched in disapproval. She handed over goods of proper quality and correct weight. When it came time to pay, Heath insisted on carrying the packages. "My horse is just there," Hannah said, gesturing to the small cart she'd pulled into town, hitched to an aging mare named Penny. Heath loaded the supplies, then surprised her by asking, "May I?" as he reached for James. Hannah hesitated only briefly before allowing Heath to take her son. To her amazement, Heath lifted James high and settled him on his shoulders, one large hand securely holding the baby's legs, the other supporting his back. "There you go, little man," Heath said, looking up at James, who squealed with delight at his new vantage point. "Now you can see everything like a prince surveying his kingdom." The sight of the rugged cowboy carrying her marked child so proudly brought a lump to Hannah's throat. More than that, it was a declaration to the town, a rejection of their fear and judgment from a man who clearly feared very little in this world. They made their way back to Hannah's cabin, Heath walking beside the cart with James still perched on his shoulders, chattering and drooling happily. The stares that followed them were different now, still disapproving, but tinged with uncertainty at this newcomer who defied their collective wisdom. Hannah's cabin sat on the outskirts of town, a modest structure her husband had built with his own hands, with a small barn that now housed only Penny and a few chickens. A vegetable garden, showing signs of Hannah's careful tending despite the dry season, stretched along one side. "You've kept this place up well," Heath observed as he helped her unload the supplies. "It's all I have," Hannah replied simply. Inside, the cabin was clean and orderly if sparsely furnished. A rocking chair sat by the stone fireplace. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, and a curtain partially concealed the bed. James's cradle, lovingly carved by Michael in his final months, stood near it. Hannah set about preparing a meal while Heath entertained James, sitting cross-legged on the floor and making the baby laugh with silly faces and gentle bouncing games. The ease with which this stranger interacted with her son made Hannah's heart ache with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow for all the normal interactions James had been denied. "You're good with him," she remarked as she sliced potatoes. Heath shrugged. "Had 4 younger siblings. Got used to having little ones around." "Are they nearby?" Hannah asked, realizing she knew nothing about this man who had come to her rescue. A shadow crossed Heath's face. "No, lost my parents and 2 sisters to cholera back in '67. My brother Caleb joined the army, last heard he was at some fort in Dakota Territory. Youngest sister married a shopkeeper in Kansas City." "I'm sorry for your losses," Hannah said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of family scattered by death and distance. "Life out here takes more than it gives sometimes," Heath replied, tickling James's belly and eliciting another delighted squeal. "But it gives us moments like this too." Hannah felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words, at the way he included himself in this moment with her and James. She turned back to her cooking to hide the flush she felt rising to her cheeks. Over a simple but hearty meal of fried potatoes, salt pork, and biscuits, Heath explained that he'd been working as a scout for the army but had recently decided to strike out on his own. "There's good land to be had up north," he said. "Thought I might try my hand at raising horses." "Alone?" Hannah couldn't imagine tackling such an endeavor without help. Heath's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Been alone a while now, guess I'm used to it." Hannah understood that all too well. "What brought you to Silveridge? It's hardly on the way to anywhere." "Heard there was a man here selling quality quarter horses. Came to take a look." He took a sip of coffee. "Didn't expect to find a town gripped by such foolishness." Hannah's expression fell. It wasn't always like this. When Michael was alive, people were kind. Even after he died, they brought food, offered help. She glanced at James, who was dozing in his cradle. But when James was born with his birthmark and different colored eyes, everything changed. First it was just stares and whispers, but after the mine collapse, they decided he was bad luck. "People fear what they don't understand," Heath said, "and fear makes them cruel." "Understanding wouldn't change his face," Hannah said with a hint of bitterness. "No, but it might change how they see it." Heath's gaze was steady. "Your boy is perfect just as he is, Mrs. Mercer. Don't let anyone tell you different." In that moment, Hannah felt a connection to this stranger that went beyond gratitude. Here was someone who saw her son, really saw him, and found nothing to fear. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Heath reluctantly rose to leave. "I should find a room at the hotel." Hannah walked him to the door, James once again in her arms. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Wilson. It's been a long time since anyone stood up for us." Heath settled his hat on his head, his eyes serious. "Those people in town, they're wrong about your boy, and they're wrong to treat you this way." "Perhaps, but they're unlikely to change their minds." Heath's expression hardened slightly. "We'll see about that." Before Hannah could ask what he meant, he tipped his hat and strode toward his horse. She watched him ride back toward town, wondering if she would see him again and surprised by how much she hoped she would. The next morning, Hannah was startled by a knock at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found Heath standing there, his horse saddled behind him and a young bay mare on a lead rope. "Mr. Wilson, thought you might need a better way to get around than that old cart," he said. "This here's Willow. She's gentle but strong. Good with noise too, which might matter with a young one." Hannah stared at the mare, then at Heath. I can't accept a horse from you, you're not. I'm lending her to you while I'm in town, he grinned. And I'll need some meals in exchange, hotel food is terrible. Hannah knew he was creating a fiction they could both live with a transaction rather than charity, and she appreciated it more than she could say. In that case, I accept. James and I were just about to have breakfast. Would you care to join us? Over the next week, Heath became a daily visitor at Hannah's cabin. He helped her repair the sagging corner of the barn roof, split enough firewood to last well into winter, and spent hours entertaining James, who had become completely enamored with the tall cowboy. Heath's presence changed something fundamental in Hannah's life. For the first time since James's birth, she had someone to talk to, someone who listened to her hopes and fears, someone who shared meals and laughter. The loneliness that had been her constant companion began to recede. In town, too, things were changing. Heath made a point of carrying James on his shoulders whenever they ventured into Silveridge, his hand always near his gun, his gaze challenging anyone who dared to look askance at the child. His size and obvious capability made even the most superstitious townsfolk hesitant to voice their objections. When Josiah Wilkes made the mistake of spitting at Hannah's feet and muttering about cursed women and their devil spawn, Heath had him pinned against the saloon wall before the man could blink, the tip of a very sharp knife pricking the underside of his chin. "Apologize to the lady," Heath had said quietly, the deadly calm in his voice more frightening than any shouting could have been. Wilkes had stammered an apology, and word spread quickly through town. The stranger with the gun and knife had appointed himself protector to the widow Mercer and her marked child. It might not have changed their beliefs, but it certainly changed their behavior. As for Hannah, she found herself thinking of Heath at odd moments throughout the day, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at James, the careful gentleness of his large hands, the sound of his deep laugh. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to notice such things about a man. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset after James had been put to bed, Hannah finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "How much longer will you stay in Silveridge, Mr. Wilson?" Heath looked over at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Heath," he corrected softly. "After all this time, I think you can call me Heath." Hannah nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Heath, then." He was quiet for a long moment. "I bought land," he finally said, "about 3 miles north of here. Good water, good grazing. I've been clearing it, starting to build." Hannah's heart gave a strange flutter. "So you're staying, seems like it." His eyes held hers. "Found reasons to put down roots." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Hannah looked away first, her pulse racing. "James would miss you terribly if you left," she said carefully, Heath's mouth curved in a small smile. "Just James." "I would miss our conversations," Hannah admitted, "and your help has been invaluable." "Is that all?" Heath's voice was gentle, giving her space to retreat if she needed it. Hannah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "No," she whispered, "that's not all." Heath reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Hannah, I need to say something," she nodded, not trusting her voice. "I came to this town looking for horses, not this. Not you and James, but now I can't imagine riding away from here from both of you." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still grieving, Michael. I'm not asking for promises, just permission to keep coming back. To keep being part of your lives while you decide if there might be room in your heart for someone new." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. She had loved Michael deeply, had mourned him bitterly, had never once considered that she might find connection with another man. Yet here was Heath, offering not demands but patience, not possession but partnership. "I don't know what I feel," she said honestly. "Everything has been about survival for so long, but I know that when you're here the world feels less harsh, and I know that James adores you. And I know that I look forward to seeing you each day." Heath's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That's more than enough for now." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. The simple gesture of affection, the first she'd received in over a year, made Hannah's heart soar. The peace of the moment was shattered by pounding on her door and shouting voices. Heath was on his feet immediately, hand going to his gun as he positioned himself between Hannah and the door. "Mrs. Mercer, open up." It was Sheriff Taylor's voice, tight with strain. Hannah opened the door to find the sheriff and several townsmen on her porch, lanterns casting ominous shadows across their grim faces. "What's happened?" she asked, fear clutching at her throat. "Thompson's girl died an hour ago," the sheriff said, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Fever took her." "I'm sorry to hear that," Hannah said carefully, aware of the rising tension. "But what does that have to do with me?" Josiah Wilkes pushed forward. "It's that devil child of yours. First the mine, then the drought, now little Sally Thompson. How many more have to suffer before something's done?" Heath stepped fully into view, his expression dangerous. "You'd better think real careful about your next words, Wilkes." The sheriff raised a placating hand. "No one's doing anything rash, but folks are scared, Mrs. Mercer. 3 children took sick last week. Sally's the first to pass, but the doctor says the others ain't looking good. And you think my 6-month-old son is causing this?" Hannah's voice rose in disbelief. "He's a baby, not a curse." "All we know is the trouble started when he was born," another man said. "We want you gone from Silveridge, both of you." Heath's hand tightened on his gun. "She's not going anywhere." The sheriff looked uncomfortable but determined. "It's not just Wilkes and his friends anymore, Wilson. It's most of the town. There's talk of burning the cabin if she doesn't leave." Hannah gasped, instinctively moving toward James's cradle inside. "I won't let that happen," Heath said, his voice deadly quiet. "One man against a town?" the sheriff asked. "Even you can't stop that." Hannah's mind raced. She couldn't risk James's safety, couldn't risk Heath getting hurt defending them. "When?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "When do we need to leave?" "Dawn," the sheriff replied. "Take what you can carry and go." Heath looked at her in disbelief. "Hannah, no. We can fight this." She met his gaze, willing him to understand. "Not tonight, not like this." She turned back to the men on her porch. "We'll be gone by dawn. Now get off my property." The sheriff nodded, relief evident in his face as he ushered the others away. When they were gone, Hannah sagged against the doorframe, trembling. Heath caught her before she could fall. "I won't let them drive you away," he said fiercely. "I won't risk James's life," she countered, "or yours. Then come with me." The words burst from him with sudden intensity. "To my land. It's not much yet, just the beginnings of a cabin and a corral, but it's 3 miles from town with a stream and good soil. We could build something there, together." Hannah stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Heath, you can't. I can and I will." His eyes were determined. "I was going to ask you anyway, just not like this, not rushed, but I've known since the second day that you and James are the family I want. Family," the word caught in her throat, "if you'll have me." His expression softened. "I'm not trying to replace what you lost, Hannah. I know Michael will always be James's father, but I'd be honored to help raise him, to be there for both of you." The sincerity in his eyes undid her. Here was a man who had carried her son on his shoulders when others wouldn't look at him, who had faced down an angry mob for them, who was now offering a future when all seemed lost. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes." Relief and joy transformed Heath's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "We'll leave before dawn," he murmured against her hair. "Pack only what you can't bear to lose. I'll handle the rest." They worked through the night, loading Hannah's most treasured possessions, Michael's carpentry tools, the quilt her mother had made, James's cradle, onto Heath's wagon. He insisted she take furniture too, promising to make multiple trips if necessary. "I want you to feel at home," he said simply. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Hannah took one last look at the cabin that had been her haven and her prison. So many memories within those walls, Michael's laugh as he spun her around the main room, the long nights of her labor, the first time she held James in her arms. Yet it was just a structure of wood and stone. Her real treasures were the sleeping baby in her arms and the man waiting patiently by the wagon. They left as the first rays of sun touched the mountaintops, Heath driving the wagon with Willow tied behind, Hannah beside him with James bundled against the morning chill. They saw no one from town, for which Hannah was grateful. She had no desire for confrontation or tearful goodbyes. Silveridge had rejected her son. She owed the town nothing. The journey to Heath's land took just over an hour. As they crested a small rise, Hannah got her first glimpse of her new home. The cabin was indeed just beginning 4 walls and the start of a roof, but the setting was breathtaking. A clear stream wound through a small valley, with pine forest on one side and open meadow on the other. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and in the distance, mountains rose blue against the sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Heath's expression was a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "It will take work to make it livable." "We're not afraid of work," Hannah said, including him in her future with that simple "we." The smile that spread across Heath's face was worth any hardship that might lie ahead. They spent that first day setting up a temporary camp beside the half-built cabin. Heath had already constructed a small lean-to near the building site, which they expanded using canvas from his supplies to create a sheltered living space. By nightfall, they had a comfortable if rustic arrangement. Bedrolls laid out, a cooking fire established, and James's cradle nestled safely under the sturdiest part of the shelter. As darkness fell and James slept peacefully, Hannah and Heath sat by the fire, the stars brilliant overhead in a way they never seemed to be in town. "Are you having regrets?" Heath asked quietly. Hannah considered the question seriously. "No," she finally said. "I'm afraid of what lies ahead of building a life from nothing again, but I don't regret leaving Silveridge and I don't regret coming here. With you." Heath reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I meant what I said, Hannah. I want to build a life with you and James. I want to be a family." She looked at their joined hands, calloused from work and hardship but now linked in promise. "I want that too." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Then we will." The days that followed established a rhythm to their new life. Each morning, Heath worked on the cabin while Hannah set up their more permanent living arrangements. He made multiple trips back to her old cabin, retrieving everything of value before the townsfolk could claim or destroy it. On his final trip, he returned with her chickens, Penny, and news that the Thompson girl's younger brother had also succumbed to the fever. "They're still blaming James," he reported grimly. "Sheriff said it might be best if none of us showed our faces in town for a while." Hannah nodded, unsurprised but saddened. "We have enough supplies to last, and we have each other." Living in such close quarters accelerated their relationship in ways that might have taken months under normal circumstances. They learned each other's habits and preferences, adjusted to each other's rhythms, discovered the give and take necessary for harmony. Hannah found that Heath was meticulously organized with his tools but careless with his clothes, that he preferred coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, that he hummed under his breath when deep in thought. Heath discovered that Hannah was an early riser, that she couldn't abide dishes left unwashed, that she talked to the chickens as if they were old friends, that she sang lullabies to James in a sweet, clear voice that made him stop whatever he was doing just to listen. And James thrived in their new environment. The fresh mountain air and constant attention from both adults had him growing stronger daily. He began pulling himself up, testing his balance, his mismatched eyes bright with curiosity about the world around him. The birthmark that had caused so much fear and superstition in town was simply part of him here, as natural as the varying colors of wildflowers in the meadow. As autumn deepened toward winter, Heath worked frantically to complete the cabin before the first heavy snow. Hannah worked alongside him whenever James was napping, learning to help with the construction. Together, they created a solid 2-room structure with a stone fireplace, tight chinked walls, and windows that let in ample light. It was small but sound, with room to expand in the spring. The first night they slept in their completed home, with James in his cradle and a fire crackling in the hearth, Hannah felt a sense of rightness that had been missing since Michael's death. This was no replacement for what she had lost, but rather something new and precious in its own right. Heath seemed to sense her thoughts. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders as they sat on their new bench by the fire. "Yes," she said simply, leaning her head against him. "Grateful, too." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "For what? For you, for this second chance. For a place where James can grow up without fear and judgment." Heath was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about how close I came to never knowing you if I'd arrived in Silveridge a day later or chosen a different town to look for horses." Hannah shuddered at the thought. "But you didn't. You were there exactly when we needed you." "Some might call that fate," Heath said thoughtfully. "Some might," Hannah agreed, turning to look at him. "What would you call it?" The tenderness in his eyes took her breath away. "The luckiest day of my life." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away as he always did, but this time Hannah rose to meet him. Their lips touched gently at first, then with growing certainty. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of promises yet to be made, of a future stretching out before them filled with possibility. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Heath rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Hannah Mercer. You and James both." The words washed over her like a blessing. "I love you too," she whispered, realizing the truth of it in her bones. Winter came early that year, blanketing their little valley in snow by mid-November. The isolation could have been daunting, but for Hannah, it was a gift time for their small family to grow together without outside interference. Heath proved to be as skilled at winter survival as he was at construction, keeping them well supplied with game and firewood. Hannah turned their cabin into a true home, adding touches that transformed the simple structure into a place of warmth and welcome. James took his first steps just before Christmas, tottering from Hannah to Heath with a look of such triumph that they both laughed through their tears of pride. Heath carved him wooden toys, a horse, a bear, building blocks that James carried everywhere, often presenting them to Heath with solemn importance when he returned from hunting. They celebrated Christmas with simple gifts and a feast of venison and preserved vegetables from Hannah's garden. As James played with his new toys by the fire, Heath presented Hannah with a small wooden box. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," Heath explained. "I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to Heath's hopeful face. "I know we've done everything backwards," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Living together before courting properly, but I want to do this right. Hannah Mercer, will you marry me? Be my wife, let me be a father to James, build a life with me?" "Yes," Hannah said through her tears. "Yes to all of it." Heath slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been building between them for months. Later that night, after James was asleep, they surrendered to that passion fully, discovering each other with tender exploration and growing desire. In Heath's arms, Hannah rediscovered parts of herself she thought had died with Michael, her capacity for joy, for abandon, for complete trust in another person. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with her head on Heath's chest, his heartbeat strong beneath her ear, Hannah felt a sense of peace that transcended mere happiness. This was where she belonged. This was home. They were married in April, when the mountain meadows were painted with the first wildflowers of spring. With no minister nearby, they created their own ceremony, speaking vows they had written themselves beside the stream that ran through their land. James, now walking steadily and beginning to form words, served as their only witness, solemnly handing them the rings at Heath's prompting. "I, Heath Wilson, take you, Hannah Mercer, as my wife and partner in all things," Heath said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, to protect and support you and James, to build our future with hands that will never tire of working for our family's good. I give you my name, my heart, and my life from this day until my last." Hannah blinked back tears as she responded. "I, Hannah Mercer, take you, Heath Wilson, as my husband and partner in all things. I promise to walk beside you through whatever paths life leads us down, to create a home filled with love and laughter, to raise James to know the goodness of having you as his father. I give you my trust, my heart, and my future from this day until my last." They exchanged rings, Heath's a plain gold band that had belonged to Hannah's father, hers the pearl ring he had given her at Christmas. Then Heath lifted James onto his shoulders, the boy squealing with delight at his high perch, and the three of them walked back to the cabin that was now truly their home. Spring brought new life to more than just the land. Their small herd of horses, now numbering 6, including 2 pregnant mares Heath had purchased from a rancher 20 miles away, grazed contentedly in the meadow. The garden Hannah had started flourished in the rich soil. They added chickens and goats to their growing farm, and Heath began construction on a proper barn. In late May, Hannah confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was carrying Heath's child. The joy on his face when she told him was something she would treasure forever, pure, unguarded elation that made him whoop so loudly he startled the chickens. "James is going to be a big brother," he said in wonder, kneeling to tell the toddler, who patted Hannah's still flat stomach with gentle curiosity. "Baby," James said, one of his growing collection of words, and Heath laughed, lifting him high. "That's right, little man. A baby brother or sister for you." As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, so did their homestead. By summer's end, they had a completed barn, an expanded garden, a smokehouse for preserving meat, and the beginning of what would eventually be a proper ranch house. Heath had a natural talent for horseflesh, and word was spreading about the quality of his stock, bringing occasional buyers even to their remote location. On a crisp October day, nearly a year after they had fled Silveridge, they received their first visitor from town. Hannah was in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables, with James helping by collecting stones in a small bucket, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was startled to see Sheriff Taylor riding toward their cabin. Her first instinct was fear had the town's superstitions flared again. Were they coming to drive them even further away? Heath emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound, his hand moving instinctively to his gun until he recognized the rider. He positioned himself between the approaching sheriff and Hannah and James, his stance protective. "Sheriff," he called as the man neared. "What brings you to our land?" Sheriff Taylor reined in his horse, looking uncomfortable. "Wilson, Mrs. Wilson now, I suppose," he acknowledged Hannah with a nod. "I've come with news and an apology." Heath's posture remained wary. "What news?" "The fever that took the Thompson children. It hit Red Rock and 3 other settlements. Killed near 30 people across the territory before it burned itself out." The sheriff removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "Doctor says it was some kind of influenza moving along the trade routes, nothing to do with superstition or curses." Hannah felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, sorrow for the lives lost, anger that it had taken such widespread tragedy to make people question their beliefs. "Some folks in town have been feeling mighty ashamed about how they treated you and the boy," the sheriff continued. "Reverend Jenkins has been preaching about the sin of false judgment. Mrs. Abernathy in particular asked me to convey her regrets." "Regrets don't rebuild a life," Heath said flatly. "No, they don't," the sheriff agreed. "But I thought you should know that if you ever wanted to come back to town for supplies or church or whatnot, you'd be welcome now." Hannah moved to stand beside Heath, James on her hip, her other hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "This is our home now, Sheriff Taylor. We have everything we need right here." The sheriff nodded, taking in her pregnant state with a flicker of surprise. "I can see that. You've built something fine here, both of you. Was there anything else?" Heath asked, making it clear the conversation was drawing to a close. Just this. The sheriff reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Thompson asked me to give you this. For the boy." Hannah accepted the package warily. Opening it, she found a beautifully knitted blue sweater, sized for a growing toddler. She said she was sorry for believing ill of an innocent child, the sheriff explained. Said no baby should suffer for adults' foolishness. The gesture, unexpected and genuine, brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "Thank you for bringing it," she said softly. "Please tell Mrs. Thompson we accept her gift in the spirit it was offered." The sheriff nodded, replaced his hat, and turned his horse to leave. "You've made a good life here," he said, looking around at their thriving homestead. "Not many could have done it." After he had ridden away, Heath wrapped his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Are you all right?" She leaned into his strength, watching James examine his new sweater with serious interest. "Yes, it's strange, but I feel lighter, as if a chapter has finally closed." "Do you want to go back to town sometime?" Heath asked carefully. Now that they've come to their senses, Hannah considered the question. "Perhaps someday, not soon, but it would be good for the children to know there's a wider world beyond our valley." Heath smiled at her use of the plural. Their second child would arrive before winter's end. "Whatever you decide, I'll support, but I meant what I implied to the sheriff. Everything I need is right here." Hannah turned in his arms, James balanced between them, their unborn child protected within her. "Everything I need is right here too." The winter of 1876 brought heavy snows and bitter cold, but within their snug cabin, the Wilson family created their own warmth. James, now nearly 2, chattered constantly, his vocabulary expanding daily. His different colored eyes and birthmark were simply part of who he was, distinctive features that Heath told him made him special, not cursed. Hannah's time came in February, during a rare break in the winter storms. After a mercifully short labor, with Heath supporting her every moment despite his obvious terror at her pain, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Heath's mother. "She's perfect," Heath whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that seemed too large for such a delicate task. The wonder in his eyes as he looked from their daughter to Hannah was a gift beyond price. James approached the bed cautiously, Heath having prepared him for his sister's arrival with patient explanations over the preceding months. "Baby," he said solemnly, peering at the red-faced newborn. "That's right, little man, this is your sister Elizabeth." Heath lifted James onto the bed beside Hannah. "You're a big brother now, that's a very important job." James nodded with all the seriousness a 2-year-old could muster, then gently patted Elizabeth's blanket-wrapped form. "My baby." Hannah's heart swelled with love for her family, her son with his mismatched eyes that saw the world so clearly, her newborn daughter with her tiny perfect fingers and rosebud mouth, and Heath, the man who had carried her son on his shoulders when the world turned its back on them. That night, as Heath sat beside the bed where Hannah rested with Elizabeth at her breast and James curled asleep against her side, she looked up to find him watching them with such tenderness it made her breath catch. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "I'm thinking about that day in Silveridge," he replied. "How close I came to riding on without stopping, how different all our lives would be." "Do you believe in fate, Heath Wilson?" Hannah asked, echoing a conversation from months ago. He reached out to stroke first Elizabeth's downy head, then James's dark curls, and finally Hannah's cheek. "I believe in love," he said simply. "Everything else follows from that." As spring returned to their mountain valley, the Wilson ranch continued to flourish. Heath's reputation as a horse breeder grew, bringing more customers willing to make the journey to their remote location. Hannah's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs, which she dried and prepared according to knowledge passed down from her mother. Occasionally, folks from neighboring homesteads would ride over seeking her remedies for common ailments. James grew into a confident 3-year-old, his different colored eyes giving him a striking appearance that now drew admiration rather than fear. Elizabeth was walking by her first birthday, following her brother everywhere with determined steps and delighted giggles. They did eventually return to Silveridge, making the journey when Elizabeth was 18 months old. Their reception was markedly different from their departure, curious but respectful, with more than a few awkward apologies offered. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on giving the children candy from her store, refusing payment with tears in her eyes. "Your boy has grown so handsome," she said to Hannah, watching James politely thank her for the treat. "Those eyes of his, why, they're quite remarkable, aren't they? Like looking at the earth and sky together." The same features that had once marked him as cursed were now described as remarkable. Hannah accepted the change with grace, but kept their visit brief. Silveridge was part of their past, not their future. Their future lay in the mountain valley where Heath continued to expand their ranch, building it into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the territory. They added to their family again 2 years after Elizabeth's birth. Twin boys they named Michael and William, honoring both Hannah's first husband and Heath's father. And on a summer evening in 1880, as Hannah sat on the porch of their now spacious ranch house watching Heath teach 6-year-old James to rope while Elizabeth helped, and the twins toddled in the yard, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of rejection and fear to the heights of love and acceptance. From a widow clutching her marked child in a hostile town to the matriarch of a thriving family on a prosperous ranch. From the day a tall cowboy had lifted her son onto his shoulders like a prince to this moment of perfect contentment, James's laughter rang out as he successfully threw his small lasso over the practice post Heath had set up. "I did it, Pa, did you see?" "I sure did, son," Heath called back, pride evident in his voice. "You're a natural." Hannah watched as her son ran to Heath, who swept him up onto his shoulders in a familiar motion that now signified celebration rather than defiance. Perched high, James's different-colored eyes scanned his domain, his birthmarked face split in a wide grin of pure joy. And in that moment, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the end of one road was simply the beginning of a better one. That sometimes what looked like the darkest day could lead to the brightest future. And that sometimes a stranger's kindness could change not just a life, but generations to come. "Mama, look how high," James called, waving from his perch on Heath's shoulders. "I see you, my love," Hannah called back, her heart full. "I see all of you." And as Heath caught her eye across the yard, his smile as warm and true as the day he'd first walked into their lives, she knew that he saw her too completely and without reservation. It was all any of them had ever wanted. It was everything they needed. It was home.